Welcome to Have History Will Travel, your weekly dose of history. Today I want to talk about the War of Regulation, 1766 to 1771. The people who live in the tri-state area, here where Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee meet, live in an absolutely beautiful area. But that very fact begs some questions. How did we get here? Why are we here? What led our ancestors to come here? I get that question a lot, and today I want to try to answer part of that question, especially for those whose ancestors came from North Carolina. In history books, you normally hear about things like the Boston Tea Party and other acts against the crown that demonstrated that push towards revolution that would eventually come. You hardly ever hear about acts that happened in the South. Today I want to talk about what happened in North Carolina. Historians argue about a lot of things, but they do argue a lot about what was the cause of the War of Regulation. Was it class conflict? Was it a regional conflict? Or was it an occupational conflict? We'll cover all three of those today. Most of those are interlocking. The people who would become the regulators had a lot on their shoulders, a burden they had to bear while they were in that colony. One of those was taxation. Also, no representation, land speculation, and governmental corruption. All four of these things played a role in the leading up to of the War of Regulation, and many of the reasons that the regulators claimed they were fighting against the oppressors of their lives. First, we need to talk about the settlement of North Carolina. Of course, settlement starts mainly in the coastal areas, but would quickly spread. They pushed out from the coast, came down from the state of Virginia, and went into the back country of North Carolina, eventually settling. What emerged was a group of Easterners who would use land speculation to make money. They would speculate on land in the West and sell it to the people coming into the colony that wanted to go out and get their own land, so they would sell that land to them, bringing the money back east. That's one of the points of contention, is that regional conflict that emerges. Therefore, you have a divide between the east and the west, the back country versus the front country. In the east, you have these big plantation homes, these very nice houses that were built by the land speculators who in some ways abused the backcountry farmers. So how did they abuse them? What was that difference? What was that divide that separated the east versus the west? Well, in the west you had planters, farmers, and in the east you had lawyers and court officials. Now the lawyers and court officials would also be in the west, but many of them had ties in the east. The planters and farmers in the west are Republicans. That's small r Republicans. Small r Republicans symbolized virtue, was independent. And the way you got independence and virtue was by owning your own land and working your own land, producing something and not being beholden to anyone else. Lawyers and court officials were not virtuous like the tillers of the ground were. Many of them colluded in the court rings that implemented high taxes and raised payments, and when those courts would come together, they would actually benefit themselves and their friends rather than help the planters or farmers that are in the West. This is where historians don't agree with it being a class conflict, because planters and farmers are in two different classes, but they were banded together in many ways to fight against the non-virtuous East. Because of all those factors, the governmental corruption, the taxation, and no representation, the East was far more represented than the West was. The regulators rose up. One of those regulators was Herman Husband. Him and his group attacked court officials and many times burned down houses of court officials and of just public buildings. The regulators worked their way through the back country, as I said before, burning buildings and causing havoc amongst some of the lawyers and the rich Eastern officials. That led Governor William Tryon to raise a provisional militia of around 1,000 men to combat Herman Husband and his band of Regulators. This conflict would come to a head at the Battle of Alamance. And this is where many historians say this was the first battle of the Revolutionary War. Of course, many don't agree with that. But it was in opposition to the crown, to Governor William Tryon, who was a royal governor. This battle happened on May 16th, 1771, where Herman Husband and his Regulators ran off, to say the least. Even though William Tryon was outnumbered, his men did succeed and put down the Regulators, effectively ending the War of Regulation. Around half a dozen of the Regulators were hung for their acts. And that brings us back to the purpose of this video. How did people get into our area? East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Southeastern Kentucky. They moved from North Carolina, many of them did. And some of that reasoning for moving here was because of the War of Regulation, those high taxes, and the Eastern officials that were abusing their power. They moved west to get away from that. And that's how we get many people in our area that are from North Carolina, can trace their ancestry back to before the Revolution, most likely came over into our area because of this War of Regulation. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you'll come visit me next week when I post another video. They upload every Monday at 5 a.m. Come and check out a piece of local history next week that I think everyone's going to enjoy.